Good afternoon. This is Javi. Javi is a former student of mine, a nurse, a wife, and a mother of 4 sons aged 18 to 25. In the summer of 2014, there's an escalation of security tension, and civilians in the southern part of Israel were receiving missiles on them. This was the beginning of a military operation. Javi's husband and her 4 sons were drafted to the military. They had to leave their cell phones behind and go without them, being with no contact for 3 whole weeks. During these 3 whole weeks, Operation Protective Edge was on. And I don't know, you probably know that wars today are on TV. And she was watching TV all day long, seeing the battles, seeing people are injured, knowing her husband and 4 sons are in there, worried, but not being able to communicate with them. Nowadays, we're used to communication, frequent communication with our close ones all the time. And we have social media. Social media also facilitates interaction, continuous interaction. Social media also allows us to communicate with many people at once and also to create groups with common interests. In the place where Javi lives, the social worker decided to use the WhatsApp in order to create a group of all the mothers and all the wives of people who were drafted that summer. And she thought it could serve some practical things. For example, it could serve if somebody needs to go to the supermarket and she has to watch her kids, then she would put on the WhatsApp group that she's going and her neighbors would help her. Or she thought it could help in babysitting and things like that. So it was meant for practical reasons. But eventually it served a much broader social support idea than we originally she thought it was. At the time, Javi was a master's student for emergency preparedness and response at BGU, and she had to choose a topic for her graduation project. So she chose this topic, and she decided she would check and see how this WhatsApp group that she belonged to affected herself and affected her neighbors. And she wanted to know if belonging to the group was increasing her resilience compared to her friends who were not part of the group. And her hypothesis was that the people who belong to the group will have higher personal resilience than the people who did not belong to the group. So what did she find? The first thing that she found was that the accumulated stress in her community was much, much higher than she initially thought. Of the 110 women which she interviewed, she found that 64 had husbands drafted, 44 had children drafted, some had nephews, sons-in-law, some even had fathers. All in all, in her community, if you took an average woman, she had 2 people very near her that were at the time were drafted to the military. So can you imagine having so many women so worried about so many people around them? The community was very, very stressed. But when looking at the community, at the personal resilience of these women, she found that indeed the women who belonged to the WhatsApp group had much higher resilience than the women who did not belong to the WhatsApp group. So in a way, WhatsApp is a way of modern storytelling because you're telling people what you feel, what you think, you're sharing with them. And this is Javi telling her personal story and turning it into science. The fundamental method of inquiry in science is the experiment. However, in disaster situations, we cannot conduct experiments as in other sciences in labs. There is no lab for a disaster. So our experiments are replaced by drills. In the drills, we imitate the scenario that we think could happen, and as a result, a lot of the outcomes of these experiments are what we think, what we imagine, what we anticipate will be the results, and not necessarily evidence-based. One such idea is community resilience. How many of you know the concept or understand or feel they understand the words community resilience? Can you please raise your hand if you feel you know what community resilience is? What I mean when I say this. Everybody that feels they know what community resilience is, please pick your hand. Wonderful. How many of you would know to measure it? If I ask you now, go out to Beersheba and measure community resilience, would you be able to do that? People who think they could measure it, please raise your hands. Okay, so there's a little gap here. More people feel that they know what I mean, but they wouldn't know how to measure it. And this is a problem we ran into about 6 years ago. We wanted to be able to measure it because we're scientists, but we didn't know how to do that. We felt we knew what it was, but we didn't really know how to measure it. So what we did is we built a group of 18 researchers from 7 academic institutions, and for 3 years we worked together. We did workshops, we did tabletop drills, we did think tanks, we did surveys, we talked with people, we brought people from the field, and eventually we were happy that we found the 5 factors of community resilience. And these 5 factors, we went out and we studied many communities, and we found that wherever we went, these factors were there. So we could measure the level of community resilience, and we could also measure the constructs of community resilience in each of these communities. For example, we found that income did not make a very big difference. If you take an average income person and a very rich person, a person with a very high income, the resilience level, the community resilience level, was not very much different. Another difference that we found was between calm times and times of stress. We repeated measurements in the same place 4 times. 2 times were calm times, 2 times were under missiles, and community resilience was actually higher when the missiles were falling. And the last thing that we found, we looked at the age, along the lifespan of people. How does community resilience change? So the first factors we looked at, it seemed that they're about the same, from being very young to being very old. But we found that 2 factors varied greatly, and one of them is the sense of preparedness, which is quite low when, at a certain level when you're very young, and it becomes lower as you grow older, while attachment to place grows higher. Now, this is very important. If we're planning intervention, we want to intervene in order to increase community resilience, it is very helpful if we know what the age of the population is and what is of most importance to them at that age. So these findings actually have practical significance. So we had this instrument, the Conjoint Community Resiliency Assessment Measure. It was a tool. It was able to measure and differentiate between different levels of community resilience, different communities, and so on. And we should be really happy because this is what we wanted. We wanted a tool to measure community resilience in a scientific way. However, in the aftermath of disasters, it is often very difficult or impossible to use sound scientific quantitative methods in order to measure things. We can't go into a situation like this with a survey and start asking people to fill our survey. People are busy with other things. So because this is not possible, many times what happens is that stories are being told and local heroes and legends arise, and these ideas actually become the story of this event with little scientific evidence. From a psychological point of view, if you look at stories, they're a way to mediate fear. But from a broader point of view, the survival of mankind can be attributed to the fact that people are storytelling animals. The history of disasters is transferred as stories many times. Stories are a way to describe disasters that have passed from generation to generation. And this also, in a way, prevents the facts from taking over in the field of emergency preparedness and response. As a scientist and as a teacher of research methods, I want to be able to measure things. Specifically in the field of emergency preparedness and response, I would like to find the instruments that will help me measure and translate the stories into science. Back to social media. If we look at the social media today, we see that we use it a lot. Everybody uses it all the time. If it's Facebook, if it's Twitter, if it's WhatsApp, we write a lot. And in this writing, you can find almost everything. And in this writing, this is also, again, a modern way of telling your story, in sharing your feelings, in sharing your needs. But this can be used by text mining techniques. We can use this modern storytelling in a scientific way and take out the needs of people, the desires of people, the fears of people, and even their coping mechanisms. And these coping mechanisms can be used in order to tell them, the leadership, what these people want. It can shape risk communication and can help the leadership and the people in a scientific way draw from the social media the facts about what is happening. The history of disasters has told us that it is not enough to be prepared for what has already happened. We need to be flexible. We need to be prepared for the unimaginable. We need to be prepared for what has not happened yet. And the way to do this is through interdisciplinary, collaborative, creative, scientific research, which will lead us from storytelling to science and to better and improved emergency preparedness and response. Thank you.